He headed toward the inn door, asking one of the inn servants in broken English where he could find the French monsieur. When Jacques arrived upstairs, it was to the sound of imperative voices speaking within the room he had been directed to. Opening the door slowly with his shoulder, he looked inside to see his father and an unfamiliar young gentleman kneeling beside the prostrate form of the Comte. The young man rose quickly and turned for the door, his expression urgent and grave. "Non," Jacques' father said in French, his shoulders slumping as he wiped his sweaty brow with a forearm. "It is too late." The young man stilled and nodded, eyeing the Comte with a frown. "I am sorry," he said, in mediocre French. "We did all that we could. My name is Retsford. I am just 2 rooms down if you need anything." Jacques' father offered no response, staring at the body in front of him with a stricken look in his eyes. The man Retsford opened the door, glancing at Jacques with a grimace, before pushing past him. Jacques' father crossed himself, and then let himself fall back into a sitting position, with his back against the wall as he ran his hands through his hair. "Father?" Jacques said hesitantly, setting down the chest. His father's head came up, and Jacques felt a flash of fear at the sight of his hopeless expression. His father motioned for him to come, and Jacques walked over, shooting a brief sidelong glance at the motionless body on the floor. Why wasn't Monsieur on the bed, where he could sleep comfortably? It would likely be hours before he awoke, if the amount he had drunk aboard the ship was any indication. "He is dead," his father said, a catch in his voice. Jacques' eyes widened, and he looked at the form of the Comte, swallowing. There was something different about the Comte, something missing. But dead? Jacques had never seen death up close. Of course, his mother had died giving birth to him, but he didn't remember that at all. His father was his only family. He felt mesmerized by the sight of the Comte, and yet he was afraid. How did death look so similar to, and yet so different from, sleeping? He looked to his father, fear taking an even greater hold at the sight of the dejection there. What would they do now? They didn't know a soul in all of England. Did this mean they would go back to France? He shivered. What would they do there without Monsieur le Comte to serve? They would be homeless, penniless. They already were penniless. The Comte was not a particularly generous master. Jacques thought of all the jewels and valuables sitting in the wagon, waiting to be brought upstairs to the Comte's room. He thought of the ruby ring he had just seen. Surely the Comte wouldn't be upset if they had to use one small trinket to buy their passage back to Calais, or a spot on the diligence, or whatever it might be called in England, to London. One small trinket out of hundreds. "I saw a ruby ring, Papa," he said in a miserable voice, looking up at his father, whose face was covered by his hands. "Would that be enough to buy passage on the packet?" His father shook his head in his hands. "It is not ours, Jacques." Jacques felt a small stirring of hope. "Shall we stay in England, then?" His father shook his head again, and Jacques fell into a confused silence. A knock sounded at the door, and Jacques jumped up, moving to open the door a crack. His father didn't stir. The French shipman stood outside, a question on his face. "The monsieur's things," the man said. "Shall I bring them up?" Jacques looked at his father, who shook his head and then froze, an arrested expression in his eyes. Jacques waited. "Papa?" His father blinked twice and looked at Jacques. He nodded at him. "Have him bring them into the next room." "Yes, please," said Jacques to the servant. "Into the room next door." The man nodded and left. Jacques' father stood and began pacing up and down the room next to the body of the Comte. His hand pulled nervously at his lips. "It could work," he said, stopping and staring at the papered wall. "No one would know." His gaze moved down to the body beside him, and he shook his head again, resuming his distracted pacing of the room. "Know what?" Jacques said. His father came over and kneeled in front of Jacques, putting a hand on each shoulder and looking him in the eye with a strange energy Jacques found disturbing. "It will not be easy, my son," his father said. "But you know how things work in noble households. Can you imagine?"